Hello and welcome to the Let's Keep Moving series with the APDA. My name is Nick Wendel and I'm a physical therapist at the Boston University Center for Neurorehabilitation and the APDA National Rehab Resource Center. Today we'll be talking about strategies to help improve walking and to reduce freezing of gait. So we'll talk on the next slide here about our team here at the Boston University Center for Neurorehabilitation. So we have a number of different physical therapists and physical therapy students that are a part of our team, and I wanted to thank all of them for helping me put together this talk today. I could not have done it without them. If you'd like to follow us on social media, we have our information at the side. And if you'd like to learn more about our center at Boston University, you can check us out at our website below. Today, we'll be talking about a lot of information regarding freezing of gait. However, this is supposed to be generalized medical advice. So we're not giving personalized advice, it's general information. If you'd like personal medical advice, we can give you some information on how to find a physical therapist local to you at the end of the talk. So again, we're providing general information, not personalized medical advice. We're going to be talking a lot about freezing of gait today. And so I thought we could start by discussing what is freezing of gait. The standard definition is on your slide. It is the feeling as if your feet are transiently glued to the floor while trying to initiate walking, making a turn, or when walking through narrow spaces or in crowded places. Sometimes freezing of gait can be accompanied by trembling in the legs and small shuffling steps. We're going to show a video of freezing of gait a little bit later on, but it's important to kind of know what it is before we start talking about what to do about it. Freezing of gait is important to know because it doesn't happen to everyone, but its prevalence does increase a little bit more as people live longer with their disease. So in the early stages of Parkinson's disease, it can affect up to about 20% or so of individuals, depending on the situation. And as people live longer, it becomes a little bit more prevalent. It's important to know that freezing of gait doesn't happen in all situations and to all people, but it's something that many individuals with Parkinson's disease deal with. And that's why we're going to be talking about strategies on how to impact and continue to move with freezing of gait in the next slide. So here we have a video that shows a few instances of when freezing of gait occurs. And so we can start to play the video here, and it shows a few of those situations that we've already talked about. So the first situation is a gentleman walking through a narrow doorway, and you can see he's trying to advance his feet. However, they're a little bit stuck to the ground. It's hard for him to advance forward until the end. Another time that freezing can occur is when turning. So this gentleman is walking straight ahead, and as he begins to turn, he's not able to advance his feet exactly the way he wants. They're a little bit stuck to the ground. Eventually, he's able to continue that turn and go along with his walking. That took about 12 seconds, but freezing of gait doesn't always take that long. So here we have an example of someone that's again turning, but their freezing is just a few seconds and then they're on their way. Finally, another example of when some individuals may freeze is when starting walking. This is often known as an initiation freeze and occurs at the beginning of the walking cycle. So you saw there that gentleman was trying to start his walking, and it took him a bit longer than he had planned, but eventually he was able to walk along and continue on his way. Now that we've showed the video and talked a little bit about some examples of freezing of gait, I wanted to ask how many of you experience freezing of gait from time to time? If you feel comfortable, please feel free to share in the chat because we're hoping to learn from all of you. Now, we can't see freezing of gait in all situations. And so on the video, we weren't able to show all times where freezing of gait might occur. There's some other times where some individuals experience freezing of gait, specifically when they're multitasking, like the gentleman on the right, or dual tasking, doing more things at once. Oftentimes when people are doing too many things at once, that can bring on freezing of gait if you're prone to it. Another situation where freezing may occur in some individuals is under increased anxiety or stress, like the gentleman on the left with the lightning bolts coming from his head. In this case, people might have more freezing of gait if there's an environmental stressor or a time pressure. One example that I hear a lot from some of my patients is when people are trying to go into an elevator and the doors are starting to close. That time pressure of walking through a narrow space in a certain period of time can sometimes bring upon freezing of gait in some individuals. Now that people have talked a little bit about what if they experience freezing of gait, I was also curious if there are any of these situations or maybe other situations that I didn't talk about that commonly bring on freezing for some of our listeners. If you feel comfortable, again, please feel free to share in the chat and we can talk about some common situations that we heard about at the end. Now that we've talked a little bit about when freezing of gait might happen, we want to spend most of our time talking about what to do about it in the future. And so there was a really nice article that came out in 2019 that interviewed hundreds and hundreds of individuals with Parkinson's disease to try to understand what strategies they use to help them continue their walking and overcome their freezing of gait. And they had many, many strategies that they boiled down into these 6 buckets of categories. And we're going to spend some time today talking about each of these buckets of categories one by one. So the first strategy that we'll talk about is shifting your weight. And so we'll go to the next slide and show a little bit more about that next strategy. So shifting your weight involves moving from your weight being centered on both feet just to one foot. This is a strategy that helps a lot of people who have freezing of gait when they're initiating or starting walking. Because what can happen is it's really hard to unweight your foot and advance it forward. By consciously thinking of shifting your weight, like the gentleman is doing in the leftmost picture, from the left leg to the right leg, he's able to unweight that left leg and start his walking pattern. So this strategy can be really helpful for people that maybe are freezing when they first start to move. Another time we talked about that freezing might occur is when trying to turn. And so we have a few in that last slide. And in this picture, we have a few instances where people are turning. So the first picture, which is in the middle, is a very narrow turn. And that can often bring on a freeze for a lot of people. However, if we take the strategy that's on the rightmost picture and take a much wider turn, what that does is it allows you to shift your weight more effectively and allows people to complete that turn or turn around without freezing of gait. One thing I talk about with my patients in the clinic is you want to try to avoid those narrow turns and almost take the turn out of the turn. When you walk with a really wide path, that allows you to be most like walking in a straight plane where many people don't have freezing of gait. On the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about another strategy that many people use with freezing of gait in Parkinson's disease. We talked about how when you're distracted or doing multiple things at once, that can often bring on freezing of gait. And so removing those distractions or focusing only on your walking can be a really helpful strategy for those people that find that they freeze when they're doing too many things at once. Another strategy for those people that may freeze when there's an increased pressure or anxiety around a certain movement is to try and just stop and take a deep breath. Often if people are able to stop, breathe, and then take a step, they're able to get through the situation that was causing some of that stress or anxiety in the first place. Positive self-talk can go along with this strategy because people can help to reflect upon periods where their strategy worked really well and reduce that stress and anxiety that can affect their walking performance. So altering the mental state can be really helpful for some individuals depending on their situation. The next bucket of categories is one that's called internal cues. In internal cues, basically what you're doing is you're taking the walking performance, which is normally an automatic task for many individuals, and making it more purposeful. What this does is it takes the walking performance and it uses a different area of the brain that's less affected by Parkinson's disease and allows you to walk more successfully. So, one example of how you do this in practice would be to count your steps as you walk. So, if you know there's a certain area of your home or your environment that often brings on freezing, you might try to count your steps as you walk through that area. This allows you to bring more attention to your walking and use those areas that are less affected by the Parkinson's disease. Similarly, another example of an internal cue is to try to walk with quiet feet. So trying to limit how hard your feet hit the ground and the noise they make can again draw your attention to your walking and allow you to walk more successfully. Finally, a strategy that we use a lot for individuals with freezing of gait is cueing someone to take big steps. So the person may have a freezing moment. They can stop and tell themselves, take a big step as the first step to start. Conversely, someone might feel like their steps are getting shorter and shorter, and that might bring on a freeze. And they might recognize that and cue themselves to take a big step to prevent the freeze from happening even in the first place. So that internal cue of taking a big step is one that's helpful for many, many people. These are just a short list of all of the types of internal cues that people with Parkinson's disease may use. And so because this is such a large bucket, I was curious if anyone in the chat uses similarly some of these cues or other cues. If you do and you feel comfortable, please do share these strategies or cues that you use in the chat so we can all learn from everyone. The next bucket of strategies that people use are called external cues. They work very similar to internal cues, but instead of relying on yourself to provide the cue, you rely on something outside of yourself. Some really common types of external cues are the use of a metronome or music. They work in very similar ways by providing a beat that people can sync their footsteps to. So what a metronome is it's a device that many musicians use that provide a consistent beat to help play music. And people with Parkinson's disease can use that metronome to help sync their walking or match their footsteps to a beat so that their walking can be more symmetrical and they are less likely to freeze. Similarly, you can use music, which might be a little bit more engaging, to help match your footsteps to the beat of the music. This is something that we're going to talk about in a lot more detail next month with my colleague Tim Nordahl in the next installment of the Let's Keep Moving series. So if walking to music or a metronome is something you'd like to learn more about, please do tune in next month to our next webinar. Finally, another common and easy to use type of external cue is stepping over a line on the ground. This could be as simple as, the line in the cement in an outdoor area that you're walking, or it could be something purposeful, placing tape on a certain area of your home or your environment that often is challenging and brings on freezing of gait. Stepping over that line gives an external cue or a goal to increase your step length and can impact or limit the amount of freezing of gait that individuals experience. Additionally, you can use technology to create a line where there isn't one. There are specific types of canes or walkers that can generate a laser line that people can utilize if they're beginning to have some freezing moments. Allowing them to step over a virtual line that's created with a laser pointer can be really helpful for some individuals. Again, in the future, in May, we're going to be talking about the use of assistive devices in our Let's Keep Moving series with Teresa Baker. And so if this is something you want to learn a little bit more about, please do tune in May. Our next kind of bucket of strategies that some individuals use with Parkinson's disease are adopting a new walking pattern. Now, this probably isn't the most common strategy that people use, but it can be really helpful for some individuals. For those of you that recognize the picture on the right, it's from Monty Python. It's the Ministry of Silly Walks. And you can see this person is walking in a very odd pattern. He's adopted a new walking pattern that is not very efficient and would not be recommended for anyone, Parkinson's disease or not. However, it highlights how if you change your pattern subtly, it may allow you to walk more successfully. So one strategy that many of my patients will use is to walk with maybe a slightly higher knee or take a few marching steps to allow them to get through a challenging area and continue on with their walking. So they're not bringing their knees as high as that first gentleman in the picture, but just bringing them a little higher can break that pattern of the freeze and allow people to walk more efficiently. Similarly, taking a sideways or a backward step, if someone started to freeze, can help to break that freezing pattern and allow them to start their walking again. Sometimes people might even take a few running steps or faster steps to allow them to get where they're going and get back into their walking pattern. So these are just some of the examples of adopting a new walking pattern, which is a type of strategy that some people use with Parkinson's disease to help to overcome their freezing of gait. The final bucket of strategies that some individuals will use is called action observation and motor imagery. And so this is really kind of two separate types of strategies that use similar mechanisms in the brain. Action observation is just what it sounds. It's watching someone else do a movement. And so you can see in the picture on the top, the woman is walking behind the man, and she's watching him walk and mimicking those movements. That allows her to put more focus in on her walking and gives her a model of someone walking in a way that is ideal. So watching other people's movements, especially when they're moving in an ideal way, can be really helpful for some individuals with Parkinson's disease as they move throughout their life. Another strategy that I was thinking about a lot this past month when I was watching the Olympics was motor imagery or mentally rehearsing challenging movements. So you can see this individual is a skier and he's mentally rehearsing his path as he goes down the mountain. His path is going to be a challenging one, and so he wants to make sure he's as prepared as possible. Similarly, people with Parkinson's disease can mentally rehearse a challenging area of their house or their environment where they commonly freeze. They can mentally picture themselves walking through that area successfully without that freezing moment. And it actually fires similar areas in the brain that are used when they're doing that in real life. That mental practice or mental rehearsing challenging movements is very helpful for people to reduce the likelihood of freezing in a certain challenging environment. When you do it, it's really important that you try to make it as vivid as possible, thinking about which footsteps you're landing with. Are you stepping first with the right, the left? What kind of shoes are you wearing? What does it feel like in terms of the weather or going through that movement? And specifically thinking about the success that you have can allow that practice to be as vivid and helpful as possible. So these are two areas that involve a way to practice without actually doing the movement. We've talked about a lot of different strategies and different buckets that are from that article that we talked about earlier in the presentation today. I was curious, has anyone used any of these strategies to help when their walking becomes difficult? And are any of them your favorite or your go-to strategy? If you feel comfortable, again, please feel free to add this into the chat. Now that we've talked about all of these strategies, we want to know, does this work? And so they had a follow-up article from the one that they published in 2019, this group out of the Netherlands, asked over 4,000 individuals with Parkinson's disease, do you use these strategies? And if so, are they successful? And what they found is that there was a 60 to 70% success rate with these strategies, depending on what activity was being done. And that's a really high success rate. So we know that there are strategies to help people with Parkinson's disease who have freezing of gait, and these strategies can help them to walk more effectively. Now, the hardest part is figuring out what strategy works best for you. Now, you may be able to take the information that you've learned today and apply it directly to your life, and that would be wonderful. So if that's you, that's great. If you're someone that's having a little bit more trouble and you want to get some help with this, we would recommend that you reach out to a local physical therapist that has some experience working with individuals with Parkinson's disease so that they can help guide you on which strategies are the most effective for you. If you don't know a local physical therapist, we're happy to help. And on the next slide, we have some information about our APDA exercise hotline. So you can call this line, 888-606-1688, or email us at rehab@bu.edu. And we'll be able to help you find a local physical therapist that has some experience working with individuals with Parkinson's disease. So you can figure out what is the best strategy for you to help you with your walking and to help to limit your freezing of gait. So I hope you guys have enjoyed learning about some different strategies for freezing of gait. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you guys, what are the strategies that you're using or any questions that you may have. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kameron Jacobson, and he's going to highlight some of those successful strategies, and we can answer some of those questions together.
Well, first off, Nick, thank you for a great presentation. I think these are some really excellent strategies that people can use in a different variety of contexts and environments. So that's very helpful, and I think it can help people be more confident with their walking and take back control over their movement. So as we said, we do want to take a moment to get to some of your questions that you had. So if you have more that are coming to your mind, please feel free just to add them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. So one question we had was, what is the best strategy that I can use to help with freezing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really is personalized to you, right? So the best strategy that works for patient A might not be the best strategy for patient B. When we talked about all of our strategies, we found that a lot of them are specific to a certain situation. So maybe you have trouble with freezing when you start walking. And so you might benefit from the strategy of taking a large step or shifting your weight. Maybe your difficulty is more with turning. And so taking a wider turn works really well for you. I think that's part of the challenge with working with individuals with freezing of gait, is to identify what's the specific challenge and what's the best strategy to overcome it. If you're able to try these on your own and that's safe for you to do, then you can try a number of these strategies and see which ones work. If you'd like some guidance, that's really where I think physical therapists can have a big role to help you find the best strategy that works for you, which may be different from your friend in your support group or your neighbor that has Parkinson's disease as well.
Thank you, Nick. We did have another question come in the chat. It was a great question from Linda. Linda says, how might caregivers be able to get involved and help implement some of these strategies for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I'm working with patients in the clinic, I often work with patients and caregivers as well. Sometimes if you're a person with Parkinson's disease, you might not always be able to tell right away that you're freezing. And a caregiver might be able to notice that and remind you of the strategy so that you could use it sooner. Or you might be a little bit distracted. We said that can happen. And a caregiver who is not focused on all the things that you're focused on can help to give a reminder about a strategy that works well. So I think it can be a team effort if you have a supportive caregiver in your life, and they can be really helpful to identify which strategies are most helpful and maybe to identify when to use the strategies or even give you a helpful reminder. So I often use caregivers if they're willing and everyone's on board in our physical therapy sessions.
Thanks, Nick. We had another question that came into the chat. This one is from Robert. Robert's asking, are there any medications that can help with this specific issue for freezing of gait? We know that medications can help with certain symptoms and others not so much. So how does freezing of gait mix in with medications?
Yeah, Robert, that's a great question. And in general, freezing of gait isn't as responsive to the medications as some other conditions or other symptoms for people with Parkinson's disease, which is why we're talking about some of these strategies. Sometimes some individuals may respond well to medication, and that might help their movement and reduce the amount of freezing of gait. But often these strategies are our first line approach for people who do experience freezing of gait. And that's why finding the strategy that works best for you is often the best plan or the best plan of attack. It's a great question.
Great. Another question that's come in from a few different viewers is the question of maybe when does freezing typically start, or maybe I'm only freezing once or twice every once in a while right now. So maybe when is it a good time to seek professional help for this problem?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And what we find is that people with Parkinson's disease that maybe haven't had Parkinson's disease as long, they're maybe don't have freezing as often, or they maybe don't have freezing at all. If you're someone that's starting to identify freezing in certain situations, I think it's a good idea to see a physical therapist early on so that doesn't start to snowball or put you in a dangerous situation. There's never a bad thing in only having freezing just a few situations, but knowing how to handle it and what strategy works best for you. So I'd be a strong advocate for, if you're noticing that freezing is happening, even if it's just every once in a while, seeking out some advice from a physical therapist to see what you can do about it so that it doesn't cause you any negative effects down the line.
Excellent. So I think we probably have time for maybe one more question. And that question is, how can I improve my walking outside of when I'm freezing?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we did focus a lot on freezing of gait today. We did that purposefully because we know that in our next series, in the Let's Keep Moving series, we're going to be talking about other strategies to help people walk that don't involve freezing of gait. One of the best strategies, or one of the most common strategies, is the use of music and metronomes to help people walk more effectively when they're not freezing of gait. And we also know that it can be helpful during freezing moments too. So if you want to learn more about other strategies to help with your walking, please do tune in to our next talk in April. That's going to be discussing the use of music and metronomes to help with walking for people with Parkinson's disease. I think it's going to be a great talk with my colleague, Tim Nordahl, and I would really recommend people to tune in.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Nick, and thank you everyone, all the viewers out there, for tuning in and asking some great questions. And now I'll just turn it back over to Nick.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with all of you guys, and you had some great questions. So thank you for attending. Again, I wanted to put in a little bit of a plug for our next talk in the Let's Keep Moving series, which is titled Walk to the Beat: How Music Can Help Your Walking, with my colleague, Tim Nordahl. If you missed any of our previous talks in the Let's Keep Moving series, please do tune in to our YouTube channel on the APDA, which is listed below. And I really hope everyone has a great week and enjoys the rest of the day.
I'm Leslie Chambers, the President and CEO of the American Parkinson's Disease Association. Each month across the country, APDA is providing support groups, exercise classes, and educational programs like this one to support the Parkinson's disease community. You can find all of our upcoming virtual events on our website at apdaparkinson.org/events. If you enjoyed today's broadcast, I hope you will consider making a donation to help keep programs like this possible. Your gift can help APDA support people living with PD through local programs, reliable resources, and groundbreaking research designed to find treatments and ultimately the cure for Parkinson's disease. Please donate today at apdaparkinson.org/donate. And thank you so much for your support.